In order to keep the gender discourse alive, the Refugee Law Project annually organizes a Gender Week, with the primary purpose of creating awareness on various gender issues in Uganda. This year's theme, dubbed From Sexual Violence in Conflict to Domestic Violence in Peace, is the fifth of the kind and consecutive in the running. As the Refugee Law Project commemorates this year's annual Sexual and Gender-Based Violence and Persecution Week, commonly referred to as SGBVP, different stakeholders, the host community, together with the refugee community, acknowledge the presence of the vice within the societies. The 2013 Gender Week started on the 4th and ended on the 8th of March. Pre-activities, however, started with the radio talk shows in Kampala and Gulu that took place on the 1st and the 2nd of March respectively. This was a way of spreading the awareness to the general public on issues of sexual and gender-based violence and persecution.
So wachi wiki eno
twagala okutegeeza abantu nti violence eno tesosola. The weekend twagirowozaako okuba special okutunulira ku bantu bano abayiseemu oba n'oyo ali okumpi okuyisa mu kintu kino. Kyetugezaako okulaga abantu nti nobody is immune. Obulumi buba bulumi buliisa amaanyi, ate okuliisa amaanyi kuno tekukosa bakyala bokka n'abaami.
On the first day of this year's celebration, staff from the Refugee Law Project visited local TV stations to advocate and mobilize the public against gender-based violence.
This morning in our breakfast meeting, we are looking at the 5th annual Sexual and Gender-Based Violence and Persecution Awareness Week under the theme From Sexual Violence in Conflict to Domestic Violence in Peace.
This Sexual and Gender-Based Awareness Week is structured across the country. We are launching it in Kampala. Tomorrow we will be in Hoima, Kyangwali. We will have prison visits on Wednesday.
The occasion was graced on the first day by marching, which sequentially rolled out to other field offices of Mbarara, Hoima and Karamoja.
I welcome you to this, our 5th annual SGBV week. And I also want to thank you for welcoming us, Refugee Law Project.
This was later followed by speeches from various stakeholders working with forced migrants who also echoed the need to have consolidated effort to fight SGBV.
The theme is From Sexual Violence in Conflict to Domestic Violence in Peace. Sexual violence is a weapon of war. In short, sexual violence is a better weapon than many bombs.
And when we repeatedly state that sexual violence is a weapon of war, it is as though we are disconnecting it in our minds from what happens in times of peace.
When combatants in northern Uganda, whether they were the LRA or UPDF, moved from the trenches and included rape as a weapon of war. When men and women in the Uganda displaced people's camps were subjecting each other to violence, it was a question of power, subjugation and domination. Sexual violence, whether in conflict or in the home, we must tackle the root causes of that sexual violence.
Unfortunately, we know that among the number of refugees, many suffered violence during the conflict, sexual violence. Just to give you a data, just to give you a number, since January 2013 up to now, only in Kampala, we have more than 40 refugees that came to report sexual cases violence.
Sexual gender-based violence is a reality. This act violates human rights. Also, it endangers the core of society, which is family cohesion and stability. It's also clear that the perpetrators and victims are from all gender and orientation.
Sexual violence affects victims and their families long after the visible effect is over and we are supposedly at peace.
Agencies, governments, UNHCR and all humanitarian organizations, are you aware of sexual violence against men and boys? How many families break down and how many young boys committed suicide because of trauma, depression, shame? Let's stand together and join each other. leave behind the African cultures and understand the effects of male survivors. Treat the rotten ones' hearts and minds to make and vote a bright future for sexual survivors.
The day did not only have speeches on gender issues, but also light moments and drama that highlighted the day's theme and experiences that refugees and other forced migrants go through.
Me, they are tying is sex. They are tying seriously. Forgive me. Forgive me. I met a group of men. They have been carrying weapons. They raped me.
Only women can be raped. Men can never be raped.
What has come out of this presentation is the issue of awareness and the issue also of a service provision that is discriminatory, that looks at female as victim of sexual violence, but then it does not look at male. Like we saw two presentations by the refugees where they first presented, where client presented, the male client presented as a victim of sexual violence, and then he was denied services, saying that the issues do not happen, it's not a reality. But then we had the same group presenting a case of a female client who presented issues of sexual violence, and then he was attended to positively. So what came out really was a sign, show that even within the service provision, there is imbalances where some people are looked at as perpetrators and some people are looked at as victims. We also saw in that same play where a client was showing that actually sexual violence he experienced in his country of origin has led to domestic violence as he tried to beat his wife.
During these awareness campaigns, the Refugee Law Project also used the opportunity to officially launch the satellite offices of Mbarara and Hoima district, so as to take the services closer to the refugee community living in refugee settlements of Western Uganda.
On behalf of the refugee community of Kyangwali, I welcome you in Kyangwali refugee settlement, as well as this function that is taking place today. A number of GBV cases are happening, such as rape, physical assault, emotional abuse in the community.
Although we've been visiting this settlement for many years, this is the first event we are having since we opened our office in Mbarara at the beginning of this year.
Let me thank the Refugee Law Project for accepting to open an office in Hoima. Our refugees have been working, trying to think around to get money or scratch every place. Then they get money to reach Kampala.
Mainly, we are here to provide legal help to the refugees. That is to help them access justice easily without having to pass through the whole process of, going to Kampala and to decrease on the transport costs and issues. Then it is also to help in the psychosocial part. That is why we have a counselor on ground, so as to also help those ones who have psychosocial issues.
And actually, I would wish to call upon the men, whenever they also feel victims, they fall victims of sexual and gender-based violence, they also need to come up and report.
Why did we open an office in Hoima? And the answer is very simple, it's to be closer to Kyangwali. But it's definitely our intention, now that we have an office in Hoima, that the interaction between everyone here, the Refugee Law Project, will become so much easier.
Most of the refugees are in settlement camps. So it's always difficult when you have to provide support from a distance. So we found it necessary, of course with help from DGF, that we open up an access, a nearer access, by opening up an office in Mbarara so that we can have it as a centralized area to help all those refugees who are in the settlement camps.
The same campaign was extended to the refugee community through outreach programs that witnessed the sensitization of different refugee groups on issues of domestic and sexual violence.
We want to incite governments, non-government organizations and humanitarian workers, including doctors, counselors and social workers,
To be aware of sexual violence against men and boys. Sexual violence is a reality.
If you find a man who is beating his wife and then he throws her out of the house because she was raped back in Congo, that is domestic violence, but it's domestic violence which was provoked by what happened during the war.
If you do not allow your spouse to have access to and control over the resources that you have within that household, that is domestic violence.
Different activities have been taking place. Today we are on community outreaches, and Kawala has been one of the communities identified. So many participants have turned up, and most of the issues that have been raised by the members have been sexual violence issues and domestic violence. But basically most of the cases we've received are on rape, defilement, indecent assault, and issues pertaining to violence within families, husband and wife fighting, and the issue of physical battering of children.
The importance of our coming here is to sensitize people to know how to fight against sexual gender-based violence.
Lakini mtoto balivyole na baliboa mtoto yangu bakamuua. Kesi yiko hapa, mabarua kutoka kwa government yiko hapa, lakini nalikosa solution. Mpaka nalilia nalichoka, mimi nakala kwa nyumba na ile mateso, batoto wengine wanaendelea kwa vyole, lakini shida beba tena ile nabakia tu chini sababu hakuna usaidizi.
Report immediately. Don't usually problem today and you report the next day. Report immediately. When I was born, I found when violence is there. But what I hate is violence spreading from my grandfather to my father, then to me as a youth. I can see the youth are here and they are very strong. I want us to fight violence because it has occurred and we know its effects. What you have run away from should not follow you here.
From my experience, it is the women who are more vulnerable to sexual gender-based violence and persecution. Why?
Previously there was no law on domestic violence, but now with the new act, it cautions everyone to avoid domestic violence, because if you're reported and there is evidence of domestic violence, you will be charged.
Why women are more vulnerable? Most of them are not aware about sexual gender-based violence because of their cultural background. You know,
parents should speak to their children. There is no justification for domestic violence. We are moving from the times when people thought women are animals and women are property and they are not respected.
In other words, engaging ourselves in domestic violence is taking our partners as less humans. That we have already experienced trauma in our various countries of origin. So in a nutshell, if we look at each other as humans who deserve to be respected, domestic violence wouldn't be an issue in Nakivale.
We need more of these events happening. We realize some communities are ignorant of the legal systems, and some of them are ignorant of the remedies available for them for domestic violence. So I would really appreciate that this SGBV continues annually to create more awareness within society.
Prison services were not left out. During this week, different prison visits were carried out around the country with the aim of providing legal aid services to the forced migrants in prison.
We had prison visits, taking the week to the refugees in prison and other forced migrants. And you know that the refugees in prison are limited to certain access to certain services. So we did on-spot services in Ruzira prison, Chigo prison, Hoima prison, Mbarara prison. And this has been ongoing, both the female wing and the male wing.
The peak of the week was crowned with the launch of the Gender Realities Report that took place on the last day in Kotido district during the Women's Day celebration.
Sometime last year, the Refugee Law Project carried out a research in Kotido about gender-based violence, collected a lot of data and had to write a report that of course we cannot use it alone. It's supposed to be used by everybody else who is trying to support women and girls in Kotido.
I take this opportunity to launch this book so that the information in these books is accessible to everybody and should be usable by everybody effectively.
The Kotido event was concluded with a football match between men and women, a match that saw women take the day.
tuzabana iteka tunezerewe ino mucyura buhoro impamo nawundi ukuruta amubawe kwitetero tuzabana iteka tunezerewe amubawe kwitetero tuzabana iteka tunezerewe